Marcus Fizel was born on June 24, 2003 in the small town of Middletown, Ohio. His birth did not cause much excitement, an ordinary boy in an ordinary American family. However, it soon became clear that his life would be far from a calm and cloudless childhood. The family environment in which Marcus grew up was difficult and stressful, and his early years were overshadowed by a number of tragic circumstances that largely predetermined his future fate. Marcus's mother, Donna Trevino, struggled to cope with the role of a parent. She was unable to provide for herself or her children. Marcus was not the only child in the family. He had several brothers and sisters, but their lives were also under the yoke of endless problems that covered all aspects of the existence of this family. Domestic violence and poverty have become constant companions of their lives. Trevino, despite her love for children, faced insurmountable difficulties. She was physically and emotionally abused by her partners, who repeatedly left her in a state of utter despair and devastation. Frequent changes of partners, financial instability, and lack of normal living conditions drove her more and more depressed. This depressed atmosphere also oppressed the children themselves. From an early age, Marcus began to realize that his home was not like the happy homes of his peers, and every day was a struggle for survival. Problems in the family could not go unnoticed by social services. Donna has been the focus of attention of local authorities more than once. In particular, one of the points of no return was the case when Marcus fell from the roof of the house. This incident attracted the attention of not only neighbors, but also child protection services. It turned out that the boy's fall was not an accident. The child was just wandering through dangerous areas of the house without receiving proper supervision. But this was just one of many alarming signals. Another disturbing incident occurred when Marcus was discovered wandering the streets of the city, unaccompanied by adults. He found himself in a dangerous situation, but did not know how to return home. These cases showed that his mother was not coping with childcare responsibilities, and social services were forced to intervene. In April 2006, when it became clear that Marcus's continued stay in his native home threatened his life and health, the boy was removed from the family. It was the moment when Marcus's fate was in the hands of the state, and, at first glance, it seemed that his life should change for the better. However, in reality, even more terrifying events awaited him. When in April 2006, social services removed Marcus Fizel from a dysfunctional family, his fate was in the hands of a system that was supposed to provide him with safety and care. As part of the adoption and custody program, Marcus was found a new family, Liz and David Carroll, who lived nearby. These people agreed to take the boy into their home, offering him, at first glance, a stable and safe environment. The Carrolls were recommended by the Lifeway for Youth Agency, which was engaged in the selection of families for children who found themselves without the care of biological parents. However, behind the exterior facade of this family, there were serious problems that the agency was not aware of. At first glance, Liz and David Carroll seemed like a typical American family. Liz was an ordinary housewife, and David was a worker. They lived in a small house where at first glance nothing foreshadowed trouble. However, deep internal conflicts between them gradually corroded the relationship. They both suffered from mental problems that the social services did not realize when they handed over the boy. The agency through which the custody agreement was concluded did not conduct a thorough check of the family's condition. In addition, the Carrolls lived with Amy Baker, a woman who was David's lover and their neighbor. Amy lived in the same house as the family, and her role in this unusual and unstable family dynamic turned out to be critically important over time. There was a strange, tense coexistence between Liz and Amy. Liz knew about her husband's affair with Amy, but continued to tolerate her presence in the house, which created a tense atmosphere. Such tension was reflected in all aspects of life in this house where little Marcus was raised. None of the adults were able to cope with their own emotional problems, let alone raise a child who had already experienced many tragedies at an early age. Amy Baker, being close to the family, played an important role in the Carrolls' lives, but her influence only aggravated the overall mental and emotional state of Liz and David. Over time, the family's internal conflicts grew, and the situation in the house became more and more unstable. This situation could not but affect the psyche and behavior of Marcus, who felt like a stranger in such an environment, deprived of stability and support. Instead of receiving the long-awaited safety, he found himself in an even more dysfunctional environment than the one from which he was taken. From the very beginning of Marcus's stay in the Carroll house, it became clear that the boy was not perceived as a member of the family, but rather as a burden. Liz Carroll, who initially agreed to take Marcus into custody, couldn't really cope with his upbringing. The boy, who had experienced serious psychological trauma and problems with adaptation, required attention, care, and professional support, which simply did not exist in this house. The Carrolls did not understand how to deal with his emotional outbursts and frequent manifestations of fear and disorientation. Every day, the attitude towards Marcus worsened, and the tense atmosphere in the house led to the fact that his needs were increasingly ignored. The alarming signals about this family, however, went unnoticed by the Lifeway for Youth agency. The authorities did not carry out regular inspections of Marcus's living conditions after his transfer to the family. Liz and David's mental problems, as well as their inability to cope with the child, remained out of sight of the social system, and none of the agency's employees suspected that the situation could get out of control. By the summer of 2006, tension in the Carroll family had reached its peak. Liz and David have already openly talked about how they can no longer cope with raising Marcus, and that the boy is becoming a source of constant stress in their lives. Their internal problems were compounded by the general economic situation and unhealthy relationships within the home. Amy Baker, who was also involved in this situation, not only did not intervene to help the child, but also probably contributed to the further deterioration of relations between family members. Unable to cope with the pressure and constant conflicts, Liz and David began to think about drastic measures that, in their opinion, should solve the problem of Marcus. These thoughts eventually led them to a tragic mistake that became fatal for the boy. By mid-August 2006, Liz and David Carroll's patience was running out. The problems they experienced in their relationship with each other, superimposed on the inability to cope with Marcus's emotional needs, created an environment of constant stress in the house. Liz felt increasingly overwhelmed by the situation, and the boy, who needed care and attention, was perceived as a burden to her. Instead of seeking help from social services or specialists, the couple made a fateful decision that marked a turning point in this tragic case. In early August, the Carroll family planned a trip to a family meeting in Kentucky. It was one of the rare events that could allow Liz and David to take a break from everyday worries and domestic conflicts for a while. Their youngest child and dog were supposed to go with them, but the question of what to do with Marcus remained open. Unwillingness to take the boy with them to a meeting where it was necessary to show a safe picture of life led to the fact that the Carrolls began to consider alternative options for his temporary detention. Marcus, being already at an age when he could express his emotions, clearly felt hostile from Liz and David. He became more nervous and anxious, often cried, and could not sleep well. These outbursts of anxiety further irritated his foster parents, which aggravated their desire to get rid of his presence, at least for a while. The night before the trip, Liz and David made the decision to leave Marcus at home alone. However, they could not just leave the boy unattended. Fears that he might make a mess or accidentally bring trouble upon himself haunted them. Then the Carrolls came up with another way to solve this problem.
Marcus to the family reunion, and they took this 3-year-old boy.
In the morning, before heading to Kentucky, they took Marcus and tied him up with a blanket, tightly wrapping the boy's body with packing tape. Then they locked him in a closet for several days, hoping that this would be enough so that he would not harm himself or the house. The closet where Marcus was left was a narrow and dark space where light and air did not penetrate. For the little boy, who already suffered from anxiety and was afraid of confined spaces, it became a painful ordeal. When Liz and David left the house, they had no doubts about their decision. They took their youngest child and dog with them, and after locking Marcus in the closet, they went to Kentucky for a family meeting. The trip was supposed to last several days, and they expected that after it was over, everything would return to normal, as if this incident had not happened. 3 days have passed. Returning home after the trip, the Carrolls found a terrible picture. When they opened the closet, they saw that Marcus had died. The boy suffocated in a locked room, unable to free himself due to blankets and ribbons tightly wrapped around his body. His body was lifeless, and Liz and David quickly realized what had happened. This moment came as a shock to them. They did not expect that their actions would lead to the death of the child. However, instead of immediately contacting the police, they decided to hide the traces of the crime. The shock and panic that gripped Liz and David forced them to act quickly. They understood that if they asked for help now, it would lead to inevitable consequences. Social services and the police will launch an investigation, and their guilt will become apparent. They made a different decision: to get rid of Marcus's body. They chose the chimney of the house for this purpose. In an attempt to destroy the traces of the crime, Liz and David burned the boy's body, hoping that this would save them from responsibility. This cruel and barbaric act not only testified to a deep moral decline, but also to a complete inability to empathize or repent. The body of Marcus, a little boy who had only sought care and love during his short life, turned to ashes. However, despite all the Carrolls' efforts, they were not destined to avoid the consequences. After destroying the body, they decided to come up with a legend that would explain the boy's disappearance. And on August 15th, 2006, Liz Carroll contacted the police, reporting Marcus missing in a local park. On August 15th, 2006, Liz Carroll called the Middletown local police station. There was panic and despair in her voice when she reported that her adopted son Marcus had disappeared in the city park. Liz explained to the police that she and the children and the dog went for a walk, and Marcus allegedly got lost when she was distracted for a moment. According to her, she searched for him for several minutes, but when she did not find the boy, she immediately called the police. At first glance, it was a classic case of a missing child, the very nightmare that haunts many parents. The police immediately began a search. The entire park and surrounding areas were combed. The police called volunteers, checked playgrounds, questioned random passers-by, but no one saw Marcus. Even trained dogs were used in the search, but no trace of the boy was ever found. This aroused the first suspicions of the investigators, because the child could not just disappear. Liz and David Carroll actively participated in the search, trying to create the appearance of caring parents. Liz seemed genuinely worried about Marcus's fate. She gave interviews to local TV channels, tearfully begging for the return of her adopted son if someone kidnapped him. "Marcus is part of our family," she said on camera. "I beg you, please return it. He needs care and love." Her emotional performances attracted public attention, and many residents of the city felt sympathy for the family that was going through such a terrible loss. But despite the outward show of desperation, the investigators sensed from the very beginning that something was wrong with Liz's story. A lot of the details of her story didn't add up. Firstly, the park where, according to her, Marcus disappeared was a small and fairly well-lit place with a lot of people. It is unlikely that the boy could have disappeared without a trace, especially in such a short period of time. Secondly, the time indicated by Liz and her behavior before and after the disappearance raised many questions. Investigators noticed that Liz was trying too hard to lead the conversation in one direction. She was too clearly focusing on the abduction, avoiding any other versions. One of the officers involved in the investigation noted, "We couldn't get rid of the feeling that Liz was hiding something. Her story was too dramatic. Usually people who find themselves in such a situation are disoriented and upset. But in her case, everything looked too thoughtful, as if she was trying to convince us of a pre-invented version. At the same time, investigators began collecting information about the Carroll family. It was found out that Marcus had recently been placed under their care, and that his foster parents had problems in the relationship, which often led to quarrels. It soon became clear that behind the prosperous facade that Liz was showing, there were deep problems, including her mental state and strained relationship with her husband. Especially suspicious was the figure of Amy Baker, David's mistress, who lives in the same house with them. The investigation began to question her to find out what she knew about the relationship in the family and the disappearance of Marcus. As investigators began to delve deeper into the Carroll family life, Liz and David felt the pressure. The lie began to take on increasingly shaky foundations, and it was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. Unable to withstand the tension and fearing exposure, the couple began to get nervous. The contradictory testimony of Liz and David only increased suspicions. On August 28, 2006, 2 weeks after the search began, Liz Carroll suddenly changed her position. Under the onslaught of investigators, who were collecting more and more evidence, she could not stand it and confessed. Liz admitted that Marcus had never been missing from the park. She said that she and David left him at home in a closet, tied up with a blanket and packing tape, and then left for a few days for a family meeting in Kentucky. When they returned, Marcus was dead. Liz's confession came as a shock to everyone. Moreover, she also admitted that she and David had tried to destroy the boy's body. Hoping to hide the traces of the crime, they burned Marcus's body in the chimney, and then threw away the remaining fragments of his remains. This cruel detail struck even the most experienced investigators, accustomed to the sight of human cruelty. After Liz Carroll's confession, events developed rapidly. The confession about the death and subsequent destruction of Marcus Fizel's body provoked a strong reaction from both investigators and the public. In the city of Middletown, news of the boy's cruel fate spread quickly, generating excitement, anger, and shock among local residents. The Carroll family, who had never been suspected of such atrocities before, found themselves in the center of a loud scandal. Immediately after Liz's confession, the police arrested her and her husband David. Both were charged with murder, child abuse, and attempted concealment of a crime. However, Liz's confession was not the end of the investigation. Investigators continued to clarify all the circumstances of the tragedy and carefully restored the chronology of events in order to bring to justice all those responsible. The next key figure who caught the attention of the police was Amy Baker. At first, it seemed that she played only a passive role, but investigators began to suspect that her involvement in the Carrolls' lives was deeper than it seemed at first glance. Amy lived in the house with Liz and David for a long time and was close to both of them. It was she who helped maintain the family facade, participating in everyday life and relationships, which made her an obvious witness to everything that was happening in the house. Amy was called in for questioning. Despite her close relationship with the Carrolls, she chose to cooperate with the investigation, fearing punishment for her possible involvement in the crime. Amy agreed to testify against Liz and David in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She said she knew about the abuse of Marcus, how the Carrolls planned to leave the boy alone at home, and even saw how they tied him up. However, according to her, she was not directly involved in the actions that led to his death, and did not know that he was left in the closet until it was too late. Amy Baker's role in the case has become one of the most discussed in court. Many considered her an accomplice to the crime because she lived in the house and had to understand what was going on. But her testimony was important for the prosecution, as she could confirm key points that helped the investigation to restore the full picture of what was happening. Meanwhile, public attention was focused on the trials that were going on in parallel for Liz and David. Liz, the main figure in this case, had to go through a complex trial during which her behavior and mental state were subjected to a thorough analysis. Liz's defense tried to present her as a victim of circumstances, a woman who could not cope with life difficulties and mental problems. However, prosecutors presented her as a conscious and violent person who not only took an active part in the crime, but also tried to hide it. Liz Carroll appeared in court in early 2007. Prosecutors charged her with second-degree murder, child abuse, and destruction of evidence. The trial lasted several weeks, during which numerous witnesses were heard, including Amy Baker, who gave her testimony about what happened at the Carroll house. Liz's confession was also presented to the court as important evidence.
Found God. I don't care if he's preaching to people. I don't care. He should not get out of jail.
On February 21st, 2007, the court issued a verdict. Liz Carroll was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 54 years in prison without the right to parole. This verdict caused a wide resonance in the society. Many considered it fair, given the brutality of the crime, but there were also those who believed that Liz could have received a lesser punishment if her mental problems and the circumstances of her life had been taken into account. David Carroll's trial was shorter, as he decided to make a deal with justice and plead guilty to murder. He received 15 years in prison for manslaughter and abuse of the body. The guilty plea allowed him to avoid a more severe punishment, but the public remained outraged by the leniency of the sentence. Many believed that David deserved more punishment, since he, being one of the main participants in the crime, had to be held accountable on an equal basis with Liz. Nevertheless, David and Liz were convicted, and Amy Baker, thanks to her cooperation with the investigation, escaped punishment. Her testimony played a key role in the Carrolls' conviction, but many remained unhappy that she did not take any responsibility for her involvement in the life of this family and what happened in the house. Public opinion was divided. Some considered her a victim of circumstances, others an accomplice who escaped justice. The court sentences of Liz and David Carroll, as well as the fate of Amy Baker, closed one of the most shocking episodes in the history of the Ohio social system. However, the consequences of this tragedy spread much further than the courtroom and affected not only the lives of the direct participants in the events, but also the entire child protection system, as well as public consciousness. Immediately after the completion of the trials and sentencing, a thorough investigation of the actions of the Lifeway for Youth Agency, which initially vouched for the Carroll foster family, began. It turned out that the organization did not conduct a proper analysis of the psychological state of Liz and David, as well as their general readiness to raise an adopted child. The agency was unable to reveal that they were not suitable for the role of guardians, that they had serious internal conflicts and mental problems, and that Amy Baker lived in their house, about whose role none of the social workers were aware. Many wondered why such important aspects were overlooked. How could social services not notice the tense and obviously dysfunctional situation in the house? These omissions caused a strong reaction among the public and led to internal investigations conducted by various government agencies. Changes have been made to the screening procedures for potential foster families to prevent similar tragedies from happening again in the future. In particular, a more thorough check of the mental state of the guardians was introduced, as well as control over their relationships and home conditions. This case has become a serious lesson for adoption agencies and social services across the state and beyond. Government officials have called for a review of existing standards for foster parents and for the creation of new monitoring mechanisms for children already placed in care. This included mandatory visits from social workers and regular communication with children to ensure their safety and well-being. The public reaction to Marcus's death was strong. Residents of the city of Middletown, where this tragedy unfolded, were shocked by the brutality of the crime. Local media covered the case extensively, and Marcus Fizel became a symbol of suffering and injustice against the most vulnerable members of society, children who depend on adults and social institutions. People left flowers and toys at the local park where Liz Carroll first claimed Marcus was missing. The townspeople tried to express their grief and honor the memory of the boy, who in their opinion deserved a better childhood and life. Many believed that both Liz and David Carroll received well-deserved sentences, but questions about the role of Amy Baker remained open. Her release from responsibility caused outrage among those who believed that, although she was not directly involved in Marcus's death, she bore moral responsibility for not intervening and preventing what happened. Despite her cooperation with the investigation, the public could not forgive her for being there when violent things were happening in the house, and did not take any measures to protect the boy. Some activists associated with the protection of children's rights have launched campaigns for tougher penalties for those who may be indirectly involved in crimes against children, including witnesses who did not try to prevent abuse. This case has sparked a debate about what responsibility should be borne by people who knew about the violence and did not take action. The memory of Marcus Fizel has become an important part of the public debate since his tragic death. Local authorities have initiated the creation of a memorial in honor of the boy, where citizens could come to remember him and express their sympathy. The memorial has become a symbol not only for Marcus, but also for all children affected by abuse and omissions of the social system. Schools and public organizations began to actively talk about the problems of child protection and the need for more serious attention to problems in families, especially in foster homes. Various charities have taken the initiative to raise funds for programs to support foster families and children in difficult life situations. Marcus's name has become a kind of reminder of how important it is to recognize signs of violence in time and intervene before it is too late. At the same time, the tragedy of Marcus Fizel also left a mark on the lives of those who were associated with him. Donna Trevino, his biological mother, although she was not involved in the process of raising the boy in the last months of his life, experienced great grief at his loss. Her experiences also became part of Marcus's story, adding to the tragedy of this situation. A mother unable to provide her son with proper protection eventually lost him forever. The story of Marcus Fizel is a vivid reminder of how important the role of adults and social institutions is in children's lives. Irresponsibility and indifference on the part of those who were supposed to protect the boy led to tragic consequences. This case has forced many organizations to reconsider their approaches and strengthen mechanisms for monitoring families with children in difficult situations. Marcus's death was an important turning point for Ohio's child custody and protection system. The changes made became part of his legacy, designed to prevent the recurrence of similar tragedies in the future.